They served the second course, some shaved beet salad with goat cheese, when she raised her glass and clinked her diamond wedding ring gently against the stem. The microphone screeched slightly as she stood. Her dress was ivory, not quite white, something a second bride might wear if she wanted to still look like the center of the universe. Everyone quieted. The tent lights caught her highlights just right. There was a flutter of cell phones and smiling faces. She had the floor. "And thank you," she said, turning to Margaret, "for helping us out this morning." I smiled automatically, unsure what she was about to say. She glanced toward the head table, gave my son a performative wink, then added, "She ironed his shirt. Perfect creases. Our favorite maid." Laughter. But the wrong kind. The kind people give when they don't know if something is a joke or a jab. A few heads turned toward me. One woman at our table blinked slowly as if unsure whether to chuckle or say something. Another took a sip of wine and avoided eye contact altogether. I sat there still smiling, fork paused midair over a slice of beet, hearing the word echo made. I looked at my son. He smiled tight-lipped. No protest. No glance toward me. He lifted his champagne flute and drank as if it hadn't happened, as if the word didn't brand itself across the space between us. It was a soft moment, soft like the sound of velvet tearing. And that was all it took. That single word was not the cause of course. Words never are. Words are just the doorways. It was the silence that followed. It was the way no one rushed to fill the space with defense or decency. It was the way the music resumed and the next tray of salmon was brought out like nothing had been said. It was the way I became part of the linen part of the background, the mother of the groom, a footnote, a utility. I kept chewing. I kept the smile on my face. I folded the linen napkin in my lap even though it was already folded. My fingers wouldn't stop twitching, so I gave them something to do. A small child dropped a chocolate cupcake near my feet. I leaned down to help pick it up. Nobody noticed. The frosting left a smear on the floor. That was the moment it all shifted. Not because she called me a maid, but because they let her. Because my son, the boy I raised alone, the boy I worked night shifts for, the boy I skipped meals to keep fed, smiled and drank and let it pass. Because every table in that white silk tent held a polite version of the same truth. I wasn't needed anymore. I wasn't someone they had to pretend to respect. The band started a cover of your song. The dance floor lit up. The bride's father stood and gave a toast that made everyone cry. I excused myself to the restroom and walked past the caterers folding napkins in the back. One of them smiled at me. I almost said thank you. In the bathroom mirror, I looked at my face and didn't recognize the eyes. They were sharp, unreadable. The kind of eyes you see in someone who has just stepped out of a fire and realized they weren't burned. They were simply never flammable. I washed my hands slowly, dried them on a monogrammed towel. My purse was on the counter. I opened it, took out my phone. It was 7:22 p.m. I had the lawyer's number saved under M. Lewis, estate. I didn't call right then. That would have been dramatic. I'm not a dramatic woman. I waited. I returned to my table. I sat. I clapped when they danced. I nodded when they kissed, and when they played that god-awful mashup of 1,000 Years and Thinking Out Loud. I walked outside the tent. The gravel crunched beneath my heels. There was a bench near the rose garden, and no one was sitting on it. The sky was fading bruised purple and orange like something sacred had been bruised. That's where I made the call. It rang twice. Margaret, the lawyer, answered, sounding surprised. "Is everything okay?" "I need to amend the documents," I said. The will. Yes. The entire structure. Executor beneficiaries. I want it done next week. He hesitated. You're sure? Very. And then I hung up. The music behind me swelled. Someone whooped. A cork popped. The bride's laugh rang out like something brittle about to snap. I didn't cry. I didn't feel much at all. But something very old inside me, something I had mistaken for loyalty, cracked like an eggshell in winter. I used to think that if you loved someone enough, they'd never leave you behind. It was a simple equation. If you showed up every day, if you worked hard, if you gave everything you had, they would remember. They would choose you back. Maybe not right away, maybe not with fanfare, but eventually, love would echo. I built my entire life on that math. I was 24 when I found out I was pregnant with Jonah. His father left before the second trimester. He was a man with nice hands and a hollow smile. He said, "You'll be a great mother," and then disappeared. I raised Jonah alone in a rental 2-bedroom on the south side of Joliet, Illinois. It was always cold in winter, no matter how high I turned up the heat. I used to wrap towels around the windowsills to keep the drafts out. There was mold in the bathroom, but I'd scrub it twice a week with bleach and a toothbrush. I worked nights as a nurse technician at Mercy Hospital, 12-hour shifts. Blood, vomit, grief, all of it on my scrubs, my hands, my mind. I'd come home at 7, cook Jonah's breakfast, and stay awake long enough to walk him to school. Then I'd nap on the couch with a timer set for 3 hours. If I let myself sleep too long, I'd miss the after-school snack time. I never did. On weekends, I cleaned offices. One of them was a dental clinic, and they'd leave pastries out if I came early enough. I'd wrap them in napkins, sneak them into my bag, and give them to Jonah in the car like a surprise. He always thought it was magic that I just had croissants. He was a sweet boy, quiet, curious. He'd ask big questions like why stars moved or why people died. Once when he was 6, he told me I was his forever home. That stayed with me. He never had the nicest shoes. I couldn't afford the Nike Jordans the other kids wore, but he had warmth and safety and someone who showed up. He never missed a field trip. I volunteered for all the bake sales. I remember sewing a bumblebee costume for his 2nd grade play from black felt and pipe cleaners. He hated it. I stayed up until 3 remaking it. We never had much, but I gave him everything I had. There were moments I see them clearly now when I had the chance to reclaim something of my own. I was offered a night supervisor position in my early 40s. It would have come with better hours, slightly higher pay, and weekends off, but it meant working longer shifts with less flexibility. I turned it down. Jonah had just started high school. He needed rides to practices, someone to nag him about college essays. There was a man once, Roger, a widower with grown daughters. He liked jazz and had laugh lines around his eyes. He was kind, patient. He once drove from Naperville in a snowstorm just to bring me tea when I had the flu. He wanted to marry me, said I deserved softness, but Jonah didn't take to him not rudely, just quietly. He'd disappear when Roger came over, say he had to study. I think he feared losing his place in my life. So I let Roger go. I believed love required sacrifice. That was the gospel I lived by. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't wear it like a badge. I just did it. Over and over. Birthdays were always a bit lean. I used coupons, bought generic cake mix, and made decorations by hand. One year I cut out little stars and glued glitter to them, then hung them from the ceiling for his astronaut-themed party. I didn't eat that day. Not because we didn't have food, but because I wanted him and his friends to have enough pizza, and I always assumed he knew. I thought children carried the weight of their mother's love in their bones. that somewhere deep in their muscle memory, they knew who held them through every fever, who skipped meals for them, who stitched their dreams together with the threads of her own unraveling life. Maybe that's what hurts the most, that I thought it meant something, that I thought it would matter, that I thought it would shield me from that feeling at the wedding, that sudden searing awareness that I wasn't seen as a mother at all, but as a fixture, a service, a relic. When Jonah graduated college, I remember crying in the bathroom stall at the ceremony because I couldn't stop picturing all the nights I stood over his crib whispering prayers I didn't believe in. And there he was in his robe and cap, shaking hands, smiling for pictures. I had done it. I had carried him across the river. But I think I forgot to step out once we reached the other side. I stayed on the shore. I stayed behind. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe that's the story I never wanted to admit to myself, that in giving everything I left nothing for me, and that left the door wide open for someone else to walk in and decide what I was worth. There wasn't one moment where it all changed. No slammed door, no sharp words, just a quiet reshuffling of closeness. It started subtly. A call returned a little later than usual. A birthday card that arrived without a message, just love, Jonah and Elise. That was the first time I saw her name signed before his. I remember staring at it longer than I should have, trying to make it mean less than it did. I told myself they were just busy, that love doesn't always look like it used to, that I was being dramatic. But the thing about small things is that when they accumulate, they become something else entirely. I noticed the shift most clearly during our Sunday dinners. At first, they came every other weekend. Elise would bring a bottle of wine, always white, always chilled too cold. She'd compliment my roast chicken, then discreetly push most of it around her plate. She wasn't cruel. She was poised, polished. Her hair always perfectly tucked behind one ear. She wore minimalist jewelry and never forgot to reapply lipstick after a meal. She spoke with precision, like everything had been rehearsed twice in a mirror. She wasn't rude. That's what made it worse. She didn't insult me. She edited me. She corrected me once when I called the salad arugula. She said, "Actually, that's watercress." I laughed, but she didn't. Jonah just smiled, kept chewing. I could feel the heat rise to my cheeks. After they left that night, I stood by the sink scrubbing that salad bowl too hard. I cut my hand on the rim. I told myself it was nothing. But these nothings kept stacking like unpaid bills. She began bringing her own wine, then her own desserts. Then slowly she offered to host instead. "We've got the new patio furniture," she'd say. "Why don't you come to us this time?" The first time I went to their condo, I brought a lemon bundt cake. Elise took it from my hands with a smile so smooth it left no fingerprints. She said, "Oh, thank you. We already have dessert, but I'll save this for later." I never saw it again. Jonah didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and chose not to mention it. That was becoming a pattern. There were other signs. Christmas morning became Christmas brunch, then Christmas Eve dinner, then one year just a video call. I wore the same red sweater I'd worn every year since he was 12. They had matching pajamas on screen. Elise laughed loudly at something Jonah said. I laughed too, but I was 2 seconds too late. It echoed. I bought them monogrammed bathrobes that year. Elise said they were sweet. Jonah didn't say anything. When I visited weeks later, I saw them still in the box in the guest closet. I started arriving early when invited, not to be helpful, but because I didn't want to miss what the house looked like before the performance began. I noticed how little of Jonah remained. No photos of his childhood. No trinkets from his college days. Not even the ceramic owl he made in 3rd grade art class, The one he used to say looked like me in glasses. I'd kept it for years. When I asked if he still had it, he said, "Oh, I think it broke in the move." The way he said it casually, like a paper plate had flown away in the wind, stayed with me. I realized slowly that I was being asked to minimize, to shrink, to become convenient. I stopped asking questions. I stopped bringing food. I stopped calling after 9. One day I sent Jonah a photo of an old recipe card he had written in crayon when he was 8. It read, "Mommy's soup chicken noodles hug." I thought it might make him smile. He never responded. A week later, Elise texted to ask if I could pick up their dry cleaning. She said she was in a pinch and remembered how good I was at errands. It wasn't a cruel message. There was even a smiley face at the end. But I stared at that screen for so long, my tea went cold. I didn't reply. I just stared. And somewhere in the silence that followed, something inside me shifted. Not like a scream, more like a sigh that had waited too long to come. I began to understand that what was being offered to me wasn't love or inclusion or even respect. It was a performance. And my role had been quietly rewritten, from mother to audience, from center to corner, from foundation to footnote. And when I stood at that wedding, clutching my clutch like it might keep me upright, I wasn't surprised. Not really. I already knew who I was to them. A symbol. A body that helped build a life they were now eager to edit me out of. I once read somewhere that grief doesn't always come from death. Sometimes it comes from the unbearable silence of being forgotten by someone who once looked at you like you hung the moon. I don't know if Jonah ever looked at me like that, but I know I once looked at him like he was the moon, and I think that's what made it all so unbearably quiet. The wedding weekend felt like a production designed without me in mind. I arrived at the hotel they'd booked for me, a budget chain about 15 minutes from the venue, and the front desk clerk looked confused when I gave my name. "Sorry," he said, scrolling. "There's no reservation under Margaret Whitlow." I tried spelling it, then spelling it again. He offered me a courtesy smile and said the room must have been missed when the wedding block was arranged. I handed over my credit card and booked the room myself. When I called Jonah, he didn't pick up. He texted me back an hour later. "Ugh. Sorry, Mom." Elise thought her dad had it handled. Glad it worked out. No apology, just a neat deflection, a cheery tone, and a soft shove under the rug. That night, I ironed the navy dress I'd bought 2 months earlier, sleeveless modest with a soft waist and pearl buttons. I packed it with care. I brought my old silver clutch, the one I carried to his high school graduation. A little worn, sentimental. The next morning, a message buzzed through at 7:48 a.m. "Hey, quick favor, can you come to the bridal suite before the ceremony? Need a hand with Jonah's shirt." It was from Elise. I stared at it for a long time. I considered not answering. I considered a lot of things, but I didn't want the drama. I didn't want to be the problem. So I walked over to the venue early, asked the front desk for the room number, and took the elevator up. The suite was filled with white garment bags, half-eaten fruit trays, curling irons, and women in satin robes. Elise was seated on a stool, getting her makeup done, phone in hand. "Oh, Margaret, perfect timing," she said without turning. She pointed toward a hanger near the bathroom door. "Jonah's shirt needs a quick press. It's wrinkled from the travel bag. There's a steamer in the closet. You know how to use those, right?" I stood there for a moment, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. "No." "Good morning?" "No, thank you." Just an assumption. An instruction. Like I was part of the staff. One of the bridesmaids made a face not at me but toward Elise. A small wince like she'd seen something out of place, but no one said anything. I pressed the shirt. I was careful. I didn't want Jonah to walk down the aisle with lines running across his chest. When I handed it back to her, she took it with a nod and said, "You're a lifesaver. Seriously, thank God you're good at this stuff." I left the room quietly. That afternoon at the ceremony, they seated me in the 4th row. Not with the parents, not beside Elise's mother, who wore a gold dress and carried a custom clutch with their initials embroidered on it. No, I sat behind the cousins. I watched Jonah walk down the aisle in the shirt I had steamed, and I realized I hadn't touched his arm once since I arrived. There was no place for me in their photos. No corsage for the groom's mother. The photographer asked me to shift slightly left during a group shot, then cropped me out entirely in the final version posted online. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. And then came the reception, the toast, the champagne, the word, our favorite maid. It wasn't the insult that broke me. It was the ease, the way she said it, the laughter that followed. The way Jonah let the moment pass like it was just another harmless quip in a long string of party banter. I went to the bench by the rose garden. The petals were pale pink, almost white in the fading light. They reminded me of the day Jonah was born, how his skin looked under the hospital heat lamp. Fragile. New. Mine. I opened my phone. Michael Lewis was the kind of lawyer who didn't ask unnecessary questions. I had hired him 5 years earlier when I refinanced the house and wanted to ensure things were clean for Jonah if anything happened to me. I'd named Jonah executor, sole beneficiary. I had included personal letters, instructions, notes about what to do with the old photo albums, the antique hutch, the books I'd collected over 30 years of night shifts and paperbacks. Now, I wanted all of it undone. I want to rewrite the will I told him. My voice was even. Remove Jonah as beneficiary. Remove him as executor. He paused. Do you want to replace him with someone else? Yes. Do you want to state a reason? No. I just want it done before Monday. I'll have it drawn up tomorrow, he said, and I'll courier it to you by noon. Thank you. I hung up, slid the phone back into my purse, took a breath. When I returned to the reception, the music had changed. The lights were dimmer. Someone was giving a long-winded speech. I stood in the back near the bar. A waiter offered me a glass of champagne. I took it. Jonah passed by once. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did and just didn't want to make eye contact. It didn't matter. I raised the glass to my lips, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. I had thought the will was about love. It wasn't. It was about legacy, and I had just decided that mine didn't include people who mistook loyalty for servitude. The papers arrived on a Thursday. It was raining. I had just finished rearranging the bookshelves in the front room, something I did every few months, like moving pieces of myself around to see if they still fit. A knock at the door. A man in a gray windbreaker handed me a sealed envelope, nodded and left without a word. I opened it at the kitchen table where the light was best. Michael had done exactly what I asked. Jonah's name was gone. Elise's name was never there, of course. But now, instead of family, the will named a literacy foundation in Chicago, the one that had helped me get my GED when Jonah was still in diapers. I added my niece Lauren as executor. She'd always remembered my birthday, even after her parents moved to Arizona. There was a place to sign and date. I stared at it for a long time before picking up the pen. When you change your will, no one throws confetti. There's no sound, no click, just ink and finality. I didn't tell Jonah right away, not because I was hiding it, but because I wanted to wait for the moment he'd ask for something. When he'd reach out, not with malice, not with cruelty, but with that quiet assumption that I would always be there to help, that I was still soft, still his. That moment came 2 months later, a Tuesday, mid-October. The leaves were turning. He called unannounced and asked if I had time for coffee. I told him to come by. I didn't ask why. I wore a thick sweater, the kind with sleeves too long and a neckline just wide enough to feel like a blanket. I baked scones. Out of habit, I made his favorite cranberry orange with a sugar crust. When he walked in, he smiled like nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek, sat at the table, told me Elise was thinking about grad school. They were looking at houses bigger places, maybe even outside the city. He talked like a man rearranging his living room, not his life. I poured coffee into my old porcelain mugs, the ones with tiny cracks along the edges. I liked them that way. Honest. Then I slid the envelope across the table. He looked at it. "What's this?" he asked, already sensing. "My will." He didn't touch it. "I wanted you to see it," I said. "So there are no surprises." He opened it slowly, flipping past the front pages until he saw the part that mattered. I watched his mouth shift. Not frown, not grimace, just tighten. "I don't understand," he said. "I think you do." He closed it, sat back. His jaw clenched. "So you're punishing me?" "No," I said, and my voice surprised even me. It was calmer than I expected. "I'm protecting what I built, what you came from. That's not fair." I looked at him. Fair. That word hung in the air like smoke. Fair is helping someone build a life and being spoken to like the help. He blinked. "Elise didn't mean it that way. You didn't stop her." He looked down. "You're overreacting." I smiled, not cruelly, but with a sadness so old it didn't need sharp edges anymore. "Jonah," I said softly, "do you even know what I've given up for you?" He didn't answer, so I told him. Not the details, not the nights, not the double shifts, not the man I loved and let go. I told him something simpler. I gave you everything I had, I said. And when it came time for you to show me who I was to you, you let someone else define me. He shook his head. "That's not true. I love you. No, you need me. There's a difference." He stood up then. The mug rattled. He started to say something clipped and defensive, but I raised my hand. "You don't have to say anything." "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said. "I know. He sighed. "Things got busy. Elise has strong opinions. I didn't think it would matter so much." "That's the problem," I said. "You didn't think I mattered." He flinched at that. We stood there not as mother and son, but as two people who had loved one another deeply and wounded one another just as deeply by forgetting that love requires tending. "I'm still your mother," I said. "That doesn't change, but I'm not the same boy you raised," he replied. And I believed him. He left not long after. Didn't take the scones. The envelope was still on the table. I didn't walk him out. I didn't cry. I stood at the window and watched his car pull away, brake lights glowing against the wet pavement. It wasn't rage I felt. It wasn't even grief. It was a quiet severing, like a thread finally snipped after years of trying to knot it back together. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not Lauren, Not the women from my book club, not even the neighbor who waters my plants when I travel. It wasn't that I felt ashamed, quite the opposite. It just didn't need to be shared. Some things lose their shape when explained. Life after the confrontation became quieter. Not empty, just still. Like a room after the last guest leaves, there's a calm that settles in the furniture, a sense that nothing needs to perform anymore. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I liked the way the light touched the edge of the curtains at dawn. I started making tea instead of coffee. I moved the kitchen table closer to the window. I took the wedding photos, the ones Elise had sent, in a stiff manila envelope weeks later with a note that read, "Thought you might want these," and I placed them unopened in the paper recycling bin. No ceremony, no fury, just the simple truth I didn't need to see myself cropped out of a life I already left. I donated the navy dress to a local women's shelter. Someone else could use it now. Someone else could wear it to a ceremony where they were wanted, not tolerated. I painted the spare bedroom the one I used to keep tidy just in case Jonah and Elise ever needed a place to stay. I chose a soft sage green, replaced the queen bed with a desk and a reading chair. It smelled like fresh beginnings. The change in the will was finalized without fuss. Michael sent me the notarized documents with a simple note, all updated and on file. Here if you need anything else. I didn't need anything else. I began volunteering at the Literacy Foundation on Tuesdays. Mostly, I helped adult learners with reading comprehension, women trying to get their GEDs, men who wanted to write better for work. I saw something in their eyes. I recognized the ache of having been overlooked, underestimated, or misunderstood for too long. One afternoon, a woman named Patrice, maybe mid-40s, sharp-tired, asked me how long I'd been a teacher. I smiled and said, "I'm not." "Well," she said, "you act like one." That stayed with me. I started wearing lipstick again, just a little. A soft coral, nothing flashy. I bought a new pair of walking shoes and started using the park trail. I waved at strangers. Sometimes they waved back. There was no grand reveal, no movie-ending twist. Jonah didn't show up at my door with apologies. Elise didn't send flowers or a heartfelt email. The silence remained, but it no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like space. And space is where new things can grow. I don't think I'll ever understand completely what happened between us, how something once so close unraveled so slowly, but I've stopped needing to understand. I've stopped needing to be chosen by people who treat love like a transaction. One day, while sweeping the porch, I found an envelope wedged beneath the welcome mat. No stamp, no return address, just my name. Inside was a photo. Jonah. Age 5. Covered in chocolate cake, smiling with all his baby teeth. On the back in ballpoint pen, someone had written, "I'm sorry I forgot this version of me." No signature, no explanation. I didn't reach out. I didn't send a reply. But I took the photo and placed it in the top drawer of my desk right beside the paperwork for the will. Somewhere between the woman I was and the woman I am now, there's a bridge no one else needs to cross. I built it for myself. The fall gave way to winter without much resistance. The trees outside my kitchen window shed their leaves like quiet confessions. The street got quieter. The sky settled into that deep, unspoken gray that lingers over Midwestern towns from November through March. People tucked in. Life folded inward. So did I. But not in the same way I used to. Not out of loneliness. Not from waiting. There was something different about this solitude, a kind of chosen silence, not the forced kind you sit through when someone has decided you're too inconvenient to include. In the evenings, I started cooking again. Not for anyone else, just me. I'd make thick soups, lentil with smoked paprika, creamy potato with leeks, and I'd eat slowly by candlelight with soft jazz on the radio. I let the ritual fill the space where noise used to be. Not noise from others, but from that constant whisper that asked, "What more can you do to be enough?" I stopped answering that question. One night, while going through a box of old receipts and documents, I found a note Jonah had written me in high school. It was folded into quarters, stuck between a W-2 and an expired insurance card. The paper was thin-lined. The ink faded. "Thanks for staying up with me last night. I know I was being a jerk. You're the only person who never gives up on me." I read it 3 times before folding it again. He meant it. Then. But meaning something once doesn't obligate the future. That's a lesson it took me 6 decades to learn. That people evolve. That love shifts. That memory is not a currency that buys loyalty. It's just a soft thing we hold until it no longer fits the shape of what life has become. Still, I didn't throw the note away. I kept it. Not as proof that I mattered, but as proof that I once did. And that was enough. Sometimes I'd walk past the closet where Jonah's childhood things were packed away: a baseball mitt, a spelling bee trophy, a battered copy of Charlotte's Web with his name scrawled inside the cover. I didn't open the boxes. I didn't need to. What I had let go of wasn't my son. It was the story I'd written about how he'd love me back. I'd made him the axis of my world for so long that when the world spun without him, I mistook it for loss. But now, in the hush of my small house, I was learning something I had never been taught: how to orbit myself. I started noticing things. The sound of the wind moving through the pine trees outside my window. The weight of my own footsteps on the hallway floor. The subtle way joy returns when you stop expecting it to arrive wearing someone else's face. Jonah called once in early December. The phone rang. I let it. I watched his name flicker on the screen like a question I wasn't obligated to answer. I didn't decline the call. I didn't pick up either. I just let it ring out. He didn't leave a voicemail. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. Because here's the truth. People don't talk about. Sometimes the boundary isn't the wall you build, it's the door you no longer open automatically. I still loved him. Love doesn't evaporate just because it isn't returned the way you need it. But I loved me too. And that was new. There was a Sunday in mid-December when I passed a mirror on the way to the garage and caught my reflection by accident. No makeup. Hair pinned back. My face fully mine. Wrinkled. Soft in places I used to hate. But there was something in my eyes that startled me. Not sadness. Not regret. It was presence. I looked like a woman who had stopped waiting. Later that night, I wrapped a few gifts for Lauren: a scarf, a second-hand poetry book, a tin of my cranberry scones. I wrote her a note that said, "I see you. I remember you. Thank you for showing up." I realized then that the most powerful thing I could do with all the love I'd saved for Jonah was to give it unconditionally to someone who hadn't asked for it but had earned it. Not as a transaction, not as a performance, but as a quiet affirmation that love can still move even when its original destination has gone dark. Winter settled in fully by Christmas. I didn't put up a tree that year. Not out of bitterness, just because it didn't feel necessary. I lit a few candles, hung the same little wreath I've used since 2002 on the front door. I baked molasses cookies and packaged them in tins for the neighbors. That was enough. I'd stopped measuring joy in volume. I'd learned to recognize it in teaspoons, On Christmas morning, I woke early and made oatmeal with cinnamon and a splash of cream. I used the good bowl, the one with the little blue flowers around the edge. I sat by the window wrapped in an old shawl and watched the snow fall with the quiet contentment of someone who no longer needed the world to look back at her. There was no call from Jonah. No text. I thought maybe he would out of habit or guilt or nostalgia, but none came, and I didn't check my phone like I used to. I let the silence be what it was. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a room you walk into and forget why you came. A scent that reminds you of someone who doesn't remember you anymore. A memory that doesn't hurt, just hovers weightless, unclaimed. I used to think silence meant abandonment. Now I see it as space. And in that space, something began to grow. In early January, I bought a bird feeder, hung it outside the kitchen window just beyond the frost-streaked glass. Every morning, cardinals and sparrows would land there, shake off snow peck at seeds. I named one of them Red. I started talking to them. Not in a strange way, just little murmurs over morning tea. Good morning, I'd say. Cold out there today. They didn't answer, but somehow they listened better than most people I'd known. One morning, while watching them flutter and scatter, I remembered something small, something I hadn't thought about in decades. Jonah, age 9, had once told me he wanted to be a bird when he grew up. Not a specific kind, he said, just a free one. I'd laughed and said, "You already are." He hadn't smiled at that. He'd just nodded serious, like he understood something I didn't. I wonder now if he always knew he'd fly far, that he'd outgrow the nest I kept so carefully lined. Maybe that's the mistake I made, assuming he'd always circle back. But people don't always return, and love when given as a contract breaks. But love as a gift, that's different. That's what I'm learning to give myself. I started writing again. Not full journals, just small paragraphs. A memory, a scent. The way a song made me feel. Some of them I wrote on the backs of receipts. Others I jotted down in the margins of library books before realizing I shouldn't. One entry from a Tuesday in February simply said I didn't check the mail today. I didn't wonder if he remembered. I folded a blanket instead and hummed a tune I don't know the name of. It felt like something close to peace. I keep those little scraps in a tin box under the bed. I don't read them often. I just like knowing they're there. That there is a record of me somewhere that doesn't depend on someone else to validate it. That's the thing no one tells you about being a mother, especially a single one. You are both architect and scaffold. You hold the blueprint and bear the weight. And when it's time to step aside, you're expected to do so without applause, without mourning, without question. But I mourned. Quietly. Privately. Honestly. And when I was done, I did something even harder. I rebuilt. Not the house. Not the relationship. Myself. Not into who I used to be, but someone smaller, softer, more whole. Not a version reduced by loss, but refined by it. I started going to the lake again in March once the ice had thinned and the wind no longer stung. I'd bring a thermos of tea and a blanket, sit on the bench overlooking the water, and let the world go on without asking anything of me. Once a woman sat beside me, older, maybe 70, in a pale gray coat. She didn't speak, just nodded. We sat like that for nearly an hour, 2 quiet women, 2 whole lives. No need to explain. When she left, she said only one thing: "Peace looks good on you." I didn't know what to say, but later at home I wrote it down, and I believed it. By April, I stopped flinching every time my phone lit up with his name. It didn't happen often, but when it did, once every few weeks, always a text, never a call. I didn't freeze the way I used to. I didn't craft a perfect response or pace the kitchen rehearsing what to say. I didn't pretend not to care. I also didn't rush to reply. I let the messages arrive like the weather. Sometimes they were harmless. Just checking in, hope you're doing okay. Once he asked if I had his birth certificate. Another time it was a link to an article about heart health. That one made me pause, but not for the reason he may have hoped. It made me realize how little he knew about me now. He was reaching back with fax reminders, neutral concern. But none of it was personal. None of it was rooted in memory. He wasn't asking about the bird feeder or the tea I drank now or the scarf I wore every Sunday to the lake. He didn't know I'd stopped wearing the ring I once wore for him, the silver band I used to spin absent-mindedly when I worried about how to love him better. I used to wear my motherhood like armor. Now it sat in a drawer beside the things I no longer needed to prove. In May, I bought myself a necklace, a small gold pendant, nothing fancy. It was shaped like a key. Not a skeleton key, not vintage. Just simple. It felt honest. It didn't unlock anything but me. I wore it with everything. That same month, I cleaned out the attic. The heat had just started to rise, and dust floated in the air like old thoughts waiting to be acknowledged. I found the box. The one labeled Jonah Keep in black marker. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside a pair of tiny baby shoes, a birthday card he made in kindergarten with stick figures and a son wearing sunglasses, a report card with a teacher's note. Jonah is bright but easily distracted. Talks too much. I laughed at that. Some parts of him never changed. At the very bottom, under a folded baseball glove and a photo album from his 10th birthday party, I found the quilt. It was patchy and worn, made from scraps of his old clothes, the blue onesie with the bear on it, the flannel pajama pants he lived in during 7th grade, the red t-shirt from the science fair. I had sewn it during the year he left for college. I never gave it to him. I don't know why. I brought it downstairs, washed it, and draped it over the couch. It was a record of who he'd been, who we had been. I didn't cry. I just sat with it the way you sit with something that shaped you, and now simply reminds you of where you've been. Later that week, Lauren stopped by. She brought lemon bars and 2 new library books for me, a novel and a biography on Eleanor Roosevelt. She always remembered what I liked. She noticed the quilt immediately. "This is beautiful," she said, running her fingers over a stitched piece of denim. "You made this." I nodded. "For Jonah?" "Yes." She didn't ask why it was here and not with him. She didn't have to. Instead, she said, "You should sign it." I blinked. "Sign it." She smiled, gentle but firm. "Yes. Somewhere. So it's yours." That night, I threaded a needle and stitched my name into the corner M, Whitlow 2023, not because I wanted to erase its purpose, but because I wanted to honor the fact that it had come home to me. I'd spent so long thinking of love as something you give away. Now I understood it could also be something you return to quietly, tenderly, without permission. One morning in early June, I stood in my garden pulling weeds from the base of the hydrangeas. The sun was warm on my back. My knees ached. My hands were damp with soil. I felt present in a way I hadn't for years. There was no performance in it. No one watching. Just a woman in her yard choosing herself. The mail came just as I was washing up. Among the grocery circulars and charity appeals, there was a wedding invitation not from Jonah, a distant cousin I hadn't seen in over a decade, but the envelope had weight to it. My name was written in real ink. It reminded me of all the things I was still included in. I placed it on the counter beside the kettle and looked around my kitchen. Not big, not new, but mine. The walls held laughter and silence in equal parts. The cupboards still creaked. The floors had that soft give of old linoleum. I used to apologize for it when guests came. I don't anymore. A home doesn't need to impress. It only needs to reflect the one who lives there. And I finally saw myself here. Not as a mother, not as a forgotten guest, not as the woman in the fourth row, but as a whole person, still standing, still here, still becoming. It was a Thursday in mid-June when I saw Jonah again. I didn't expect it. I was at the co-op downtown holding a bunch of radishes comparing prices when I heard his voice, not loud, not close, just familiar in a way the body recognizes before the mind does. He was standing near the bakery, talking to someone on the phone, one hand in his pocket, the other resting lightly on a bag of brioche buns. He looked thinner, paler than I remembered. His hair had more gray at the temples. I stood still, half hidden behind a display of summer squash. My heart didn't race. My breath didn't catch. I just watched. He ended the call and turned, looking right past me, not out of malice, just absence. He didn't see me. He walked toward the dairy section the same way he used to when we came here together after his Little League games. I remember how he'd beg me to buy the chocolate milk in the glass bottles. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the radishes in my hand to grow warm. Long enough to know I wouldn't call out to him. I didn't need to. I left the co-op without buying anything. Walked to my car, slowly hands steady. No tears, no bitterness. Just that same quiet understanding we are not always meant to be witnesses to the people we've raised. Sometimes we are only meant to carry them for a while and then let them go even if they never look back. That night I sat on the porch with a cup of mint tea and watched the moon rise. I thought about calling someone. Lauren, maybe. Or the woman from book club who'd lost her sister last year and knew what unspoken grief felt like. But I didn't. Instead, I opened my notebook, the one I'd started filling with small thoughts, scraps of memory grocery lists that turned into poems, and I wrote something simple. I saw my son today. He didn't see me. That used to feel like abandonment. Today, it just felt true. I closed the book. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is allow things to be exactly as they are. I went inside, fed the cat, turned off the porch light, and that should have been the end of it. But life, even when it stops waiting for applause, has a strange way of circling back. The next afternoon I got a letter, not in an envelope, not through the mail. It was hand-delivered, slid through the slot in my front door, folded in half with my name written on the outside in his handwriting, a little messier than it used to be, but unmistakable. Inside, just a single page. I don't know if you want to hear from me. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, but I saw you yesterday at the co-op. You were holding radishes. You looked peaceful, like someone who doesn't wait to be chosen anymore. I almost said something. I didn't. I was afraid. Not of you, of the silence between us. I know I failed you. I let things happen that I should have stopped. I let someone love me while letting them push you away. That's not love. Not the kind you showed me. I didn't know how to carry both loyalties, so I dropped the one I thought would always forgive me. You didn't. And I get that now. I don't expect anything. Just wanted to say, I remember. The soup, the stars on my ceiling, the time you stayed awake 3 nights in a row when I had mono, just so I wouldn't wake up alone. I remember, even if I forgot how to show it. Jonah. I read it once, folded it. Didn't cry. I tucked it into the same drawer where I keep the quilt and the signed will and the photo he sent that day with no signature. I didn't reply. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because some letters aren't meant to be answered. Some are just the bridge, and the only way to cross is alone. I used to believe that reconciliation was the goal, that everything broken needed mending, that silence between family was unnatural, a gap that begged to be closed. I thought forgiveness was a duty, not a choice, and that to love someone truly you had to keep the door cracked, even if they never walked back through it. But over time, I've learned that peace and repair are not always the same thing, and not everything must be salvaged. Some things are meant to be left where they fell. The letter sat in the drawer for weeks. I didn't forget about it. I saw it every time I reached for a battery or a pen or the spare checkbook I hardly ever used. Sometimes I would unfold it, reread the sentence I dropped the one I thought would always forgive me. He was right. I had always been the one to forgive. As a child, he used to throw tantrums so loud the neighbor's dog would bark. I'd hold him afterward whispering that we all have storms, that even anger is just sadness in a different coat. When he crashed the car at 17 and lied about where he was, I paid for the tow, the repairs, and never once brought it up again. When he forgot my birthday 2 years in a row after meeting Elise, I smiled anyway and sent him a card for his. Forgiveness was not something I gave. It was something I was. Until I wasn't. Until I realized that forgiveness, when expected instead of earned, becomes a leash. And I had spent enough of my life on someone else's lead. But that didn't mean I didn't still love him. Love isn't always loud or active or alive. Sometimes it's quiet. Still. Tucked under the ribs like a name you don't say out loud anymore, but still flinch at when you hear it in passing. One morning, early July, I walked the lake trail just before sunrise. The sky was pink and thin, like the inside of a shell. The world was quiet, except for the shuffle of gravel under my shoes and the distant honking of geese. I stopped at the bench and sat. There was no one around. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a small box. Inside, folded carefully, was the photo Jonah had sent. The one of him at 5, covered in cake, grinning like the world was still magic and I was the magician. I placed it on the bench beside me. Then beside it, I set down the letter. The breeze tried to lift the corner of the paper. I held it still with a stone. And then I said, not out loud, but in the place we speak from when the words are too sacred for sound, I release you. Not from blame, not from memory, just from the hold. He will always be mine, but no longer my responsibility. There's a difference. I left the photo and the letter there. Maybe someone would find them. Maybe not. That evening, I sat in my living room with the windows open. The air smelled like warm pavement and wildflowers. I made myself a gin and tonic, not too strong, just enough to feel the ice against the glass. I put on Billie Holiday and leaned back in my chair. And for the first time since the wedding, I thought about Jonah not with pain or anger or ache, but with something else. Gratitude. Because if he had not forgotten me, I might never have remembered myself. If he had not let them laugh, I might still be trying to earn back what was never truly lost. And if he had not handed me that final silence, I would never have found the sound of my own name. Not Mom, not Maid, just Margaret, just me. And I liked the way that sounded in my own mouth. There's a photo of me taken last fall, long before the wedding. I didn't know it was being taken at the time. Lauren had snapped it during one of our Sunday walks. I'm sitting on a park bench, scarf wrapped around my neck, a thermos of tea in hand, looking out toward the water. My expression is unreadable, neither smiling nor frowning, just present. When she sent it to me, I almost deleted it. I didn't like the way my hands looked old-veined, the skin folded like crepe paper. My hair had grayed faster than I expected. My jaw wasn't as sharp as it used to be, but the longer I stared at it, the more I understood what she saw. Not a woman decaying, but one enduring. It now sits in a frame near my reading chair. Not because I think I look beautiful, because I look real. That's what I've begun to cherish more than anything, not performance, not perfection, but proof. Evidence of having lived, of still living. Most days now are quiet. Not lonely, not boring, just slow in the way things are when there's nothing to chase. I rise without an alarm. I make breakfast something warm, something simple. I water the plants. I sit with my books. I write small truths in a notebook with a worn leather cover. One of those truths from last week reads, "My life is not full of people, but it is full of presence." I see Jonah sometimes not in person, but in echoes. A man laughing 2 aisles over at the grocery store. A dark sedan pulling out of a parking lot. A pair of sneakers like the ones he used to wear in college. I never follow. I never stare. I just let the moment pass through me. I've come to understand that what I miss is not him as he is now, but the version of him I carried. The one who held my hand at the county fair when he was 7 and whispered, "Don't let go." The one who sang off key in the back seat. The one who once asked if birds could be homesick. That version lives inside me, still untouched by time, undamaged by distance. It's taken me over 60 years to realize that we do not have to let go of love in order to let go of expectation. I don't expect him to come back. I don't expect an apology. I don't expect our story to be rewritten, but I do expect from now on to be seen by the one person who always overlooked me the most, myself. The woman who once gave everything until she had nothing left. The woman who ironed a shirt out of habit and was mistaken for the help. The woman who raised a son alone, who buried her own desires so deeply that it took half a lifetime to hear their voices again. That woman is not broken. She is not bitter. She is not invisible. She is here. She is me. And she is enough. Some treasures had been recovered. Others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.